Hey Rovers, in this video I'm going to be shaping the mast, but I'm also going to take some time to explain why I've chosen to build the mast in the manner in which I have. My name's Alan Mulholland, I'm a solo sailor, and this is the story of how I built my Wave Rover 650. 3 years ago, I refitted a 40-year-old Contessa 26 and took her on an amazing 7,800 nautical mile ocean voyage. We crossed the Atlantic twice, but a knockdown on the second crossing and COVID-19 put an end to my solo circumnavigation. So now, I'm building a new boat, smaller, lighter, but more suited for a solo circumnavigation. The Wave Rover 650. Well, I've removed the clamps from the mast and I've made a preliminary inspection, and I have to say I'm really happy with the results so far that I can see. Now, before I get into shaping, I just want to go over why did I choose to build a solid mast as opposed to a hollow mast, and why did I use Titebond 3, which is a PVA glue, that's a polyvinyl acetate glue, as opposed to an epoxy. Well, let me get into that. Well, let's look at hollow versus solid masts, and I've built both in the past. I went with solid this time because I've come to realize over the years that hollow masts usually fail from the inside out with very little warning, and that's because generally it's my understanding that condensation works its way through the protective coating that people put on the inside of the mast. Either maybe your wire is abrading against it or just a breakdown in that coating period. And that's all it takes. Condensation gets in there, rot starts, and you don't get to see it until there's a failure. So we're going to avoid that by going with a solid mast. The second thing is the weight savings of a solid mast versus a hollow mast on such a small mast, especially given that the top of this mast is only 3 inches in diameter, meaning that it would have to be solid for a good portion of the upper mast anyway. Only the lower section would be hollow, and that wouldn't be such a terrific weight savings. It'll be very, very small. It would be probably somewhere in the order of 25% less than what the mast is. And we'll get to that in the third part of this series, and I think everybody will be quite surprised how little this solid mast weighs. The second thing I wanted to talk about was the glue I chose. So I went with Titebond 3 as opposed to epoxy. And I know a lot of people were saying, why didn't you use epoxy? Well, I've come to realize, again, having used Titebond 3 in several applications, both on the boat building and construction side, that I have a lot of confidence in that glue, in both in its strength and its waterproof ability. So as long as I am above the waterline, I'm very confident using this glue. What are the advantages? Well, it's considerably less expensive. It also gives me a terrific working time over epoxy. Cleanup is easy. Now, what are the disadvantages of Titebond 3? Well, you've got to have a tight joint. See, epoxy is a great gap-filling glue, whereas Titebond 3, you really need to have a good joint. So I made sure that my joints were all pretty good, and there was an exception to that, and we fix it up with epoxy after. No big deal, you'll see it in this video. Now, the Titebond 3 really requires a lot of clamping, or you can apply a lot of clamping pressure. You can't do that with epoxy. Epoxy, in order for epoxy to work well, it has to have that gap-filling ability so you don't clamp it. Well, when you're dealing with construction-grade lumber, which has twists and crowns and bows in it, you need that clamping pressure to be able to straighten it. And so that's where Titebond 3 comes in, and that's the main reason I've chosen Titebond 3 over epoxy in this case. The mast is also keeping with the Wave Rover philosophy of keeping the boat low cost, low tech, and easy to build. Now let's crack on with the shaping. Well, in the last video, you saw me glue up this beast. It's really 4 pieces of 16-foot 2x8s and 4 pieces of 16-foot 2x6s. It's just regular construction grade spruce, pine, and fir, with the majority of this mast as spruce and I think 2 pieces of pine and 1 piece of fir. Very readily available and not very expensive. Well, now that I've chalked out the taper of the mast, the mast tapers from the partners, which is the point that it leaves the cabin top, and it tapers down to approximately half, just a little more than half the diameter. And right here where we see the 2 screws, that is bracketing a foot either side of the partners, and I taper the mast back again to the base. Well, my Makita saw is just a terrific saw. I've had this saw for about almost 15 years. I've built several buildings, and this is the second major boat project that it's also done, and it just keeps on going. And no, Makita is not sponsoring this video, although if you can get them to do that for me, that would be terrific. So I made the cuts on this side. I just want to establish something here. This is the top of the mast as I've determined, and then I've actually done my cross cut just a little bit higher, and that just gives me a little bit of protection in case there's some checking that'll occur. I'll be able to cut it off to the correct height later. You might also notice that I've been cutting just outside my line, and that's because I want to leave a little bit of space for sanding later on. Anyway, the 2 main cuts have been made. Because the laminations weren't all perfectly aligned on account of defects in the lumber, I can see that the glue line looks really, really good. And it's nice and solid, no voids. And that's right at the edge. So I can safely assume that the glue joint is quite sound on the inside. Anyway, all that's left now is to turn the mast over, just roll it over, and then reestablish my lines and make those cuts. And I'll end up with something that's pretty close to a square. Okay, so the mast is a bit heavy at this point, but still easy to turn over. Now I've reestablished the lines. First of all, a center line and then the 2 tapered lines. And what you're noticing here is that, I don't know how well the camera will pick it up, but the mast, the taper lines aren't centered on this 2x6. They're actually centered on the center line. And the reason for that is these were the first 2 laminations right here. And then I noticed they were going off, so I corrected it on the last 2 laminations. But this isn't a problem. This is why we use 2x6s. And really, we're ending up with less than 4 inches at the top here. In fact, it'll be tapered down to more like 3.5, depending on the mast fitting. So we're all set now to start cutting these lines. So many of you probably did the math on this and you said, well, the skill saw isn't going to get through 6 inches. Not if you cut from both sides. It'll only cut maybe 4.5 inches in total, still leaving about 1.5 inches in the center. So to take care of that, well then I switched to the Sawzall with a long blade, and we'll just cut a little bit. I put this wedge in here, by the way. It's just to take a little bit of pressure off the blade. Okay, here we go. Okay, so you can see that although that's working, it's working very, very slowly. So over the, almost 28 feet of mast, that's probably going to take maybe 30 or more minutes, and that's just one side. So then the thought occurred to me, why not grab an axe and just split it? So we'll give that a go. Here we go. Just place it in. It kind of speeds things up quite a bit. So I'll just grab that camera now and just show you what it looks like. So we're splitting this piece right here off, and we're left with this little section in the center. It's about 1 inch, about 1 inch, 1.5 inches. We're going to hit that with the power plane, which will be a much faster solution. All right, I've got a bit of axing to do right now. So that actually went really well, taking the axe to it. It was done in a matter of minutes instead of hours. So we're left with this little bit. It's about 1.25 inches now that I can see it clearly. So I'm going to take the power plane to it, which will, well, we'll see how long that takes. So you can see that's not going to take long. Mrs. Rover has better things to do than to stand there holding the camera, so she has to get going. I'll get this done in 5 or 10 minutes. All right, time to crack on. So now that the mast is nice and flat, we have a nice surface to work on. I don't know if the camera can pick it up, but the mast takes a definite swing like this to the right at the very top, about 4 or 5 feet from the top. And I've put the laser level on it to find a straight line, and let me just show you what I found. I found that the actual center of the mast is right here, so well off to one side. But that's fine because the outside edge is still, well, probably too close. The outside edge is way over here, and that's the other side. So we're going to end up with a straight pole. There's no problem. But we came within, well, 3/8 of an inch of our edge. If you're going to do a longer mast, you would have had to take some extra precautions in the glue up. But yes, looking good. She's nice and straight all the way down. And now we'll snap some lines and get some saw cuts going. There we go. 2 nice lines. So now with the lines snapped on the mast, you can see that it's very clearly skewed off to the left side here. And that's just fine. We'll just cut that right into we're going to cut this into a square. By the time we're done, it'll be a square. Okay, that went pretty well. Actually, it went really fast. That's the beauty of cutting through softwood. The next thing to do, of course, is just like we did on the other sides. We're going to flip it over, transfer the lines, and cut through. This time, 90% of the mast will be cut through just with the skill saw. There'll only be a tiny bit right around the partners where it's just a fraction too thick for the blade. And the blade is 2.5 inches. Its typical skill saw will get approximately 2 3/8 to 2.5 inches of depth when it's fully extended. All right, time to crack on with the other side. Well, the mast has now been turned into a tapered square, so it's also a really good time to inspect the mast. And I'm going to do that in a second, but right now I just want to tell you guys that these are all the offcuts that I made, some of the more substantial ones, some of the edges, all different areas of the mast. And I intend to leave these outside in a maritime winter and inspect them in the spring and see what they look like, because it's really a test of the glue. And you know, we have an area here, there's a scarf joint right there. We have plenty of ones with laminations. So it'll be the maritime winter with the heavy snows we have, that'll put pressure on it. We have a lot of freeze thaw, that's a lot of water going to it and water getting in there and expanding. So we'll see how strong this is in the spring. But right now I just want to show you what my inspection looks like. So I'm going along the mast here and I'm looking at the glue joints, and right here there's a glue joint and it's a little wide. It's about, for our European watchers, that's about 1 millimeter at this point and less, and here, well, it's a good solid millimeter, or in other words, it's a good 1/16 of an inch. And here's another section where I'm not really happy, so I'm circling these and I'll be doing a repair on those. I mean, chances are it's strong enough, but this is a really important bit of the Wave Rover kit, and it's not going to take me very much time just to take a saw, run it through these grooves, and then after I've shaped the mast into an octagon, which is the next step, then I'll come back and fill those with a thickened epoxy mixture. There's only 2 or 3 spots. Here's another one right here, and in this case it's a breakout from a knot, so I can just fill that. I don't want to fill it right now because after I shape the mast, some of this area will be gone and it'll expose more of the glue joint. But I do want to make the saw cuts while I have a nice flat surface to work on. Anyway, time to crack on with turning this mast into an octagon. So I've set the saw to 1.5 inches, and that'll be deep enough to open up some of these joints. Okay, can you get a close-up of that? So all I've done is I've created a groove. I can fill that with epoxy and then a thickened epoxy mixture and let it set. Great. So there was a little bit of mild surface checking on this face. So that's where the wood sort of naturally splits apart. And so I just dug that bit out as well. There were four spots. That's no big thing. I just don't want moisture getting in there. Once this is all sealed up and it's painted, it'll be painted white, of course, then it should reflect the sun and be pretty bulletproof, I would think. Okay, so what we had was a 4-sided shape, and now I'm in the process of turning that 4-sided shape into an octagon. So how do you go about doing that? Well, this is where I'm going to use a metric tape measure. Normally you see me use imperial, and the reason for that is it's just so much easier. So I measure across there and it works out to 83 millimeters. And then I take 83 millimeters, I divide it by 3, and that comes to 27.6 millimeters. And with the 27.6 millimeters, then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to mark out 25 millimeters from each edge. And the reason for 25 instead of 26 or 27 is I want to have just a little extra wood left over to make sanding easier. So now with the thirds, a third of the distance on each side, and I've done the same down at the partners. Now it's just a matter of snapping some lines and then taking the saw. All right, time to crack on with that. Okay, there we go. And snap. Good. All right, so set your saw to 45 degrees. And then you might want to take a test cut on a piece of wood just to understand where the marker on your saw actually lines up with the blade. I've just done this so many times, I just know it's the outside of the blade lines up with the 45-degree line, which is different than the 0-degree line that you would normally use. So bear that in mind. All right, once you have that squared off, it's really easy. Well, now we have a really cool looking octagonal mast. And we're going to change the mast from an octagon to a hexadecagon. That's right, a hexadecagon, which is a 16-sided polygon, or let's just say a 16-sided mast, which is almost circular in shape, and then we'll just sand it back. So let's crack on with turning it into a hexadecagon. Very same procedure as turning it into an octagon. I'm going to snap a few lines and use the power planer. Now with the first half, the top half of the mast all marked out, I can start the planing process. I mean, granted, you could probably do this by eye, but I'm using it also as an exercise to straighten the mast even further. I'd like to take a moment to honor the Wave Rover benefactors. So what is a benefactor? Well, these folks have made a contribution of $100 US or more to the project, and their names will be affixed to a bulkhead inside Wave Rover and will be traveling with me on our circumnavigation. Now, these donations truly are much appreciated. Well, Rovers, this is probably a pretty good time to stop this video, but in the next video, which is the third and final video in this mast building series, I'll be doing some pretty interesting things. There's some checking on the surface of the mast. I'll be fixing that. There's a number of knot holes that could prove to be detrimental to the longevity of the mast. I'll be fixing those. Of course, some of those saw cuts that you previously saw me prep, I'll be showing you how I went about fixing those. Now, there's also going to be some interesting testing done. I'll be testing some of the glue joints. I'll be doing some rudimentary tests on the amount of deflection the mast can take. Of course, I'll be weighing the mast, and we'll see how much does this approximately 28-foot mast weigh. And I'll also be giving you a proper breakdown of how much this mast cost, where the money went. Until next time, Rovers, thanks for watching. Well, the Wave Rover patrons, with their pledges of support, really do make the creation of these videos possible. Now, if you'd like to know more about Wave Rover's patron page and benefactors bulkhead, I have links to both those pages in the video description. Now, another way to help Wave Rover, and it doesn't cost you a dime, is by sharing our content on your social media. So now, as always, Rovers, thanks for watching. Give us one more. Brilliant.